Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Evening, everyone, and welcome to the Monday, September 25th, 2023 regular Board of Education meeting. We'll now.
Bosso.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Martindale.
Here.
Mr. Schreiner. Mr. Caldwell.
Here. Next is the adoption of the agenda. Can we get a motion to approve tonight's agenda? Can we have a second?
Second, Johnson.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Any additions or corrections? Here none. Roll call, please.
Ms. Martindale.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Bosso.
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from the September 11th, 2023 meeting. Those are available on board docs. Can you have a motion to approve the minutes? Second?
Second.
Ms. Johnson. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Nope. We have,
Mr. Bosso.
yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Ms. Martindale.
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes. Tonight we have two presentations that we're going to share with our community. First is going to be a local report card and graduation overview by Dr. Brian Bowser.
President Caldwell, members of the board, Dr. Wise and Mr. Garside, good evening. It is my pleasure to be with you this evening and share the results of our local state report card that, as you well know by now, was released to the public last week. And I wanted to take an opportunity to share highlights, things we continue to be proud of and celebrate, and also things we continue to need to work on and get better. So the first thing I want to celebrate is we have something the same the second year in a row. We kept the STAR system. That was introduced last year, and that does remain. What does continue to change, however, over time is several new metrics and measures and calculations will be phased in over time. So what was calculated one way will continue to evolve and change as this report card continues its rollout over hopefully the next several years. I think it's also important to underscore here, this is one tool in our toolbox. It's very important. It's important to contextualize it as one day of a child's day, 175 with us, and we use lots of diagnostic measures and assessment tools to continue measuring how we're going to get better serve our children, and help them achieve at the highest levels. So if you can go to the next slide, thanks, Evan. Let's acquaint ourselves with the STAR system as the state defines it. Remember that those 3 stars is right what the state expectation is. Anything above that, the 4 and the 5 exceed state expectations. The 2 need some support to meet the state expectation, and the 1, which we don't need to talk about, needs significant support. And so just to orient ourselves to that 3 stars is the spot on place that we want to be. Next slide. There are 6 evaluative categories and actually are components, and actually only 5 right now. The areas of achievement, progress, gap closing, early literacy, and graduation. I'm going to talk more about those in depth. That 6th one, the college, career, workforce, and military readiness, is a report only coming in 2025. It will be a measure. I will tell you that there's lots of data being pulled, and I think where the state is at this point is trying to figure out where they're pulling this data. Lots of it is either partial or missing, and so we continue to refine and work with them to make sure that data is accurate as we move closer and closer to 2025. I'm going to focus on the first 5, if you want to go to the next slide. And how did we do? So the very first measure is achievement, and we earned the state's 3 stars, which is exactly where they expect us to be at this time. Achievement really is a measure of they weight each test in the quintiles, and the higher we perform, the stronger we become with our performance index score, and we earned a solid 3 stars in that category. The next one I want to talk about is early literacy. I stood up here last year and told you this would be 2 stars this year. We know that. We believe it's a flawed system. Let me just give you a small snapshot of why we believe it's flawed. A huge part of this calculation is moving students from off track to on track. So first, let me tell you, last year, less than 33% of our kindergartners came to school ready to learn. They were less than kindergarten ready. What we have to do is we give an assessment in September, so we just gave it. Once you are on or off track, you stay on or off track for the entire year, regardless of what happens. Here to and on the next. So this data that these two stars are actually representing are not only last year's data, but 2 years ago data. And the other part that I believe makes this flawed is it's not apples to apples. So if we use an assessment that we believe is rigorous and tells us the truth, there's a list of some that you can choose from that are very easy. It look real shiny to get a bunch of stars up there if we picked an easy one, because everybody would appear on track. That's not what we're trying to do. And the other thing that makes it slightly flawed, in my opinion, is as you move around the state, and we have many families that move, one district may be using assessment A, this may be using assessment B, we may be using assessment C. So I believe the calculation's flawed. I told you there would be 2 stars, but here's what we do know. We have a lot of work to do to catch our kids up. When we have less than 33% coming ready, we've implemented things like all-day kindergarten. We believe strongly in the science of reading and continuing to make that stronger. We spent a great deal of time talking about that last February. And so that's something we're paying attention to. But again, I believe the star system there is really wonky. The next one I'm going to talk about is graduation in the 2 stars. I also stood up here last year and told you we would be getting 2 stars because remember, this is 2 years in the rear. So these stars don't represent the class of 2023 that we just sat and helped get across that stage. This was the class of 2022. Again, I want to be careful here that this isn't a shiny star race. This is about helping children. Let me give you a good example. Some of our exceptional children, students with disabilities, when they meet all of the graduation requirements, the law allows us to keep them for additional programming beyond the graduation year if the parents and the team agree that that's a good thing to do. We do that because we believe it best serves children. In the calculation, that actually dings us as non-graduates. So I can tell you if that weren't in place, the last 2 years we would have had 3 stars. That doesn't matter, it's about the child, not the star. There is conversation and legislative talk right now about removing that. I don't know where that will go, but I can stand here with relative confidence, assuming nobody changes anything, that next year we'll be talking about 3 stars regardless of whether it goes away or not. We saw a bump and our students were very proud of that. That data was being crunched late Friday night, and we believe we'll see the shiny 3 stars regardless of what happens at the State House. Moving on to progress, this is something we're always very proud of. Where those kids start behind the line, we work really hard to catch them up. This year, we scored in the top 15% in the state in growing kids faster than anybody else. So we're always very proud of that. They start behind, we get them to where they need to be. And the gap closing those gaps in between our different subgroups, again, above state expectations. One thing that was added in here this year that I'm very proud of, we should all be very proud of, is we talked about chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism, the state defines that you miss more than 10% of a school year for any reason. So 175 days, 10%, that means you're missing 17 and a half-ish days of school. 2 years ago, 55% of our population missed more than 17 and a half days of school. If they're not here, we can't teach them. Last year, I can't see, we had 40.9% of our population chronically absent. This year, I'm proud to say we have that number down to 31. That is still too much, but as you can see, we are on a steady decline, cutting that number, having our students in school, and that's very important. And I believe a strong reason of why we are scoring above state expectations, or at least a part of it. Next slide. So what are some of our takeaways and next steps? We're going to continue growing students, continuing to catch them up. When you look at some of the improvements over time, our graduation rates up over time. We've moved more students into the advanced and accelerated categories of the tests. We've decreased the amount of students in the very lowest level of the test. and our absenteeism has decreased over 2 years. So we're very proud of that. Our buildings just got a hold of this data last week when the public saw it. It was finalized last, so they're digging in right now. What do we notice? What's missing for our students? And we'll be taking more and more deep dives into that. Continuing to strengthen interventions and programming. Well, I already mentioned the science of reading and early literacy. We were attacking that before COVID. We know that our students have a gap in vocabulary currently right now. As an example, we're still waiting on the state to decide what their high quality materials are, but we have pilots going on in several of our elementary schools looking at strategic phonics programs for systematic ways to solve students. And I'll also put a plug in here. The state over the summer quickly said, we have some tutoring money. Who's interested? And I said, me. And we wrote a grant. And we got one of the highest awards in the state, over almost $1.1 million worth of tutoring service. It's just rolling out. We're still finding out a lot about it. I met with them today, but we're very excited to bring that to some of our students who are showing gaps and need additional supports to catch up. So stay tuned as we get our hands around what that will look like. And be like, and you know, just to brag a little bit, when you compare us to people like us, the state calls that the urban 21. We're not really the big 8 or the urban 21. So there are 21 districts around like us. When you look at our performance, our overall, which I skipped, we tied for first. Our achievement, we tied for second. Our progress, we tied for first. Our gap closure, we tied for third. And our performance index was number 3 in the group of 21. And I'll go back now to circle since I skipped it. Also new on the report card this year is an overall rating. So they rated the entire grade card in totality. We scored 3.5 stars, which is above the state's expectation. So we're very proud of that also. Next slide. So in closing, I think just to contextualize this into when we start at the beginning and less than 33% of our students come to us with smiley faces, bright new shoes and book bags, but not ready for kindergarten. We have to look at what it's like when they walk out the door. And you've seen these stats before. They were in your Southwesterner. But we had 36 graduates last year enlisted in the military, 1,641 industry recognized credentials in the class, 3,669 college credits were earned, 13 associate degrees were earned, and almost $27 million in scholarship funds. And so I think about the eligible graduates, while the basic exit is a high school diploma, which they received, 67.5% of last year's class are left with both a diploma and college credit or industry recognized credentials and or military enlistment. And so I think for that, we should be very proud looking at the start line and where we end our kids. And so with that, I will stop and be happy to answer any questions that you might have or things you're wondering.
Thank you, Dr. Bowser. Can you talk a little bit about the barriers for our students, for why they're not coming to kindergarten prepared? Like what are some of the challenges that our district faces for our kids?
Well, I think there could be several, access to affordable preschools and high quality preschools continues to be a conversation around the state and around the area. Just plain old lack of experience in some opportunities, some families aren't able to afford the same opportunities as others. We continue to seek out ways to provide those and provide access. Some children just aren't ready. The rigor of what school is at 5 has changed dramatically since anybody in this room has gone to kindergarten. That's part of the reason the board committed to all-day kindergarten as an early accommodation intervention early on. So I think it's a million reasons. And then I have to say it, although we're tired of saying it, we're coming out of a global pandemic where we were all locked up and holed up for a long period of time. And then we're going to see the effects of that with children for a long period of time. To which extent I couldn't answer, I'd only be speculating, but clearly it has to be a factor.
Can you talk about how the diversity of our district impacts that readiness, like with non-English speaking parents and that kind of.
Absolutely. We are wonderfully diverse and we're excited about that. And each of us comes with a different story. You talk about our large EL population. Many of our children are learning language for the first time, some of whom fled and are not fluent in their primary language. And so some barriers there, you know, again, it's whoever comes to our door, finding the right services to support them and make sure they have what they need to catch up as quickly as possible. I think we have some good evidence by the finish line we're doing a lot of those things.
Any other questions? Question on chronic absenteeism. I know that we've made investments into truancy services. Has that been successful, and how are we doing with reducing absenteeism through, getting kids to show up?
Yeah, I think,
Enforcement, I hate to use that word, but.
yeah, no, I think it's a great, we have used considerable grant dollar investment to try to tackle some of this problem. I think we could see evidence on paper that it's definitely a downward trend. We tried to approach this not from a punitive standpoint, but a supportive one. We have tried to target schools with more than 27% and provide additional support, not because you can't, but what's in your way that you aren't able, and what can we remove and get out of the way. I can give you an anecdotal story. We miss you, Anthony. You haven't shown up to school. What's going on? We're suddenly homeless over the summer. We don't have beds. Well, we connected with Dewan, our housing stabilization coordinator, and suddenly we removed the barrier. We have that child on the bus in middle school. And so a lot of times folks don't even know what to ask for help. But the good news is we have great trusted adults who, as you pointed out, we've invested in some resource with grant dollars to say, we want you here, you belong here. It's part of the moniker, right? We miss you, where are you? And sometimes we can get folks to open up when that relationship's built, because it's not a gotcha, it's a what do you need? Sometimes we have to go gotcha, but that's not our go-to. It's about we want you here and we want you to be successful.
And my last question about takeaways, you talked about the data just got back to the buildings, at the same time as the public got it. What plans are made at the building as a whole to address the individual building concerns of parents and families involved in this conversation? I know we have building committees in our buildings. Are those parent representatives involved in those plans as well?
Yeah, the parents vary in terms of their representation on our leadership committees through our schools. Of course, we want them to be involved. They're part of the story, right? But they'll start diving in and tackling and tearing apart what each little thread in there means for each of our ecosystems is different and has different needs. And some of our children are showing up very prepared for school. That's a different conversation than almost 100% that aren't. And so, of course, we want parents. I can give you a great example of that. Already, we've had a school on the west side of town who's held a parent come into school and see what's going on, and let's talk about the learning that's going on in the classroom. We want you to be a partner with us. So, I mean, that's just one example I can think of. But those are, yes, of course, we need parent partners and we want to be involved. We all hold a part in this in our community and helping our children be successful.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions. Anyone else? Thanks, Dr.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is going to be Bullying Awareness Month with Dr. Steve Lusher.
Good evening, President Caldwell, members of the board, Dr. Wise and Mr. Garside. We're going to shift gears, sort of. As Dr. Bowser talked about the academic indicators and our continuous improvement, as we think about barriers to student success and our mission to make sure that every child feels safe, seen, heard, and valued in our schools, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this month. And this month is actually Bullying Prevention Month. And so we wanted to share a little bit of information with you about how we have looked at resources and looked at support systems in our schools to make sure that students are feeling safe. And that as we think about this topic of bullying, which you see in the news, we see it all over social media, and some of us have very personal and real stories having dealt with bullying, we wanted to share a little bit of information with you. So first, as we operationally define bullying, where it veers off from just conflict or not getting along, there are two indicators that we look at. So two criteria. The first is an imbalance of power in some way. So sometimes you think in physical power, especially with young people, can be social credibility, popularity, wealth. Any of those pieces that can create an imbalance of power between students is something we look for. The second piece that we look for, or indicator to determine whether this is a bullying situation, is repetition. So if you see that imbalance of power and that aggression happening, either verbally, physically, or what have you, that repetition and seeing a trend in that behavior is the second criteria we look at. Is this an isolated event? Have we seen a pattern of behavior between the target and the person who is in fact bullying? And that's where we kind of land then with the strategies we employ to work with our students.
So just to build on that, while all of that is true, the other key factor here is the age of the student, right? And the continuum of the developmental level of the student. Sometimes overt behavior with 16, 17 adolescents is very different than a 6-year-old who's coming out of egocentrism trying to navigate the world. And some of that is just testing and trying. All of those things require teaching and replacement behaviors, but it's not just black and white, it's gray sometimes, because all of this is not, discipline comes from Latin to mean to teach. And that's what really our job is to make it stop and to teach how we do behave in a more productive way.
So as you know, we do have obviously board policy, and then our student codes of conduct have very specific language about what encompasses bullying, harassment, intimidation, where that falls within our policies. So as we think about boundaries and expectations, it all starts here. And then we transition into, what would this look like in the life of a child? And our world is dramatically different today. So obviously physical aggression or physical bullying, we've experienced and seen those things were very physical in nature. Emotional, where we're looking at, some things that are more what I would say covert happening with students, but really where we land is digital and social mediums that our students face today. So the bullying that we see many times happens outside of the school day, but then comes through our doors, and you can see some of the impact with our students and their experience. This is where we see things on social media sometimes where students won't want to come to school and could contribute to attendance. Digital platforms through texting, email, also social media. So these are the 4 domains we look at when we think about the function of the bullying behavior, and then how ultimately we're going to see that impact students in each 3 or 4 of these domains. And you have probably seen some improvements. So we work very hard to update our website to make it very easy for anybody who sees something to say something. On our worst day is when we finally get a phone call from a parent and we find out a child's been struggling for months and we had no idea. And the parent picked up the phone to call. We want it to be very easy for, it could be a community member, it could be a board member, it can be a parent, it could be a fellow student. But if you see something that's happening, it's very important that you let us know so that we can address it. Research would tell us that the most effective way to deal with bullying behavior is to do it efficiently, to provide feedback, and to not let there be a long timestamp between when the occurrence happens and when you're addressing it. And so for us, we need that information in a very timely way so that we can address it with our teams. So, get excited.
I'm glad you got excited. And just to piggyback on that, having served as a principal for a long time, sometimes parents have told me, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't think it was a big deal. We want you to tell, because all of our job to raise up is to help children. That's the goal. So if it seems like a big deal to you or even a small deal, we want to know. Because what I can promise you, I can't control what other people do. I would just say this to kids. There's no way I can control what other people do. But I promise you will always react to it in some way. And so sometimes when parents are frustrated, like nothing's happening, I say, call the person you reported to, check in. I can't share about other people's children, maybe, but I can at least update you that I heard you, I seen you, and I promise you I've got it. So just be a safe adult. Some ways to tackle this: be a safe adult and help stop bullying. We've helped with your support and grant funds. We've tried to fill our schools with trusted adults. From social workers to student support liaisons to our amazing staff, front office staff, clerical staff, bus drivers, principals, everybody. We want students, you belong here, right? Everybody belongs here, and we want them to feel trusted, safe, seen, and heard, so then they need support, they have access to a trusted adult.
So additionally, with those resources and being able to infuse case managers, social workers, student support liaison, we have people identified in those buildings. There's a clear pathway for where children can go when they're feeling like they're in a situation where they need support. I think the other piece that's extremely important as you think about this cultural shift in this perspective, you have the person that is bullying, you have the target, and you have this very important third party who historically has been a bystander. The goal with creating environments where everybody feels included is they also feel empowered to stand up. and to advocate. And advocacy can look different. It may not mean going and having a conversation with the bully, but it may mean going and finding a safe adult so that that child has a level of support. And that's the piece where, as we think about a month like October and bullying prevention and awareness, this is a critical piece. This is when you see a cultural shift in your schools where students are not only cared for by the adults in the building, but you have a culture of students that are committed to including everyone and making sure that they feel safe and valued at school. And, I don't have hard data on this, but I've seen that shift. And as we think about our continuous improvement planning process and valuing relationships and truly connecting with students and families, this is where you see that shift, where you see the empowerment of our students to be able to create very positive cultures in our schools. So as we wrap, obviously October is a great time to kind of reinvigorate our commitment to making sure that students are not bullied in our schools. And as Dr. Bowser said, we can't always prevent it, but what we can assure you as we are made aware through enhanced opportunities to report, as our student support care teams are working with families, we can respond. We can respond swiftly, and we can respond with strategies that support not only the target, but also those that are around the bullying. With that, any questions?
I have a couple. So what do we do to inform students of what to do? Obviously, 21,000 students aren't going to watch the YouTube video from tonight as much as we'd like them to, but how do we make sure kids know what steps they can take if they're doing?
I think that comes back to, again, as we think about our continuous improvement planning process, when we look at every student and being responsive to their social emotional needs, it's not just those academic indicators. It really does go back to a lot of the resources that we put in place to have those extra folks that are really, masterful and have a lot of expertise in this area. So whether it's your licensed social worker at your building, the counselors that we have in the elementaries, and I think there's a pretty clear pathway with how we can use those resources. I know that our teachers, as they meet, they're talking about kids, they're talking about instances. And I think the other piece too is just continuing to come back to, as you think about, it's not if, it's when, and then what do those mechanisms look like, just like when we have an emergency in our building, right? The other thing I would say too is some of this comes to, we have a TSIP model that we've had for many years in our district. This year, we have an additional 25 staff members, that want to be a part of those teams because you have great strategies for how you can, support students and staff through what would be traumatic instances. And bullying is, obvious, maybe not quite, I would say, as a palpable or large experience as something in a TSIP model. But what I would say is you're seeing, I think, more of a receptivity of our staff to create a skill set and strategies to be able to help our students as well. So long-winded way to say, I think we put resources in the right places. I think we have people that have the skill sets to be able to support students. And I think now you see kind of a periphery of staff members who are really interested in being able to support that cultural shift from the bystander to the upstander.
I agree that there's a lot of resources there because my point is that what is the offensive strategy? What are we doing to educate kids before they're bullied to make sure that they understand so they don't have to get to that step?
So let's take a couple of pieces there. One, developmentally appropriate age. Go over the cook guide. That's one strat. That's one specific. Two is study. These concepts are embedded in K-12. Again, developmentally appropriate for the levels. That's most different. And when you really look, and as you get around the buildings at the start of school, and I'll go back to the littles because it's easier to communicate this with older children. It's a little bit more direct. But with littles, you often watch classroom rules, and they talk about what does that look like. So in many of the classrooms, you'll see 2 or 3 things of what it means to be respectful and listening to each other and various things. I mean, from how do you line up in the hallways with bubbles and tails or whatever the terminology is now that we're going to, that's where you put your hands behind your back and all your bubbles and tails. All right. So whatever it would be, that idea of being respectful and developing, we watch that go on a consistent basis. So those are very specific things that are done as we start the school year. I continue to see staff reinforce those pieces over and over. The other things that I've opened my mouth at this point, I want to go back when in the presentation where it talked about repeated. I don't want folks to walk away with the impression of the first time we don't do anything. That's not, that's a definition piece. It's addressed the first time, but by the same token, it's not treated the same way because it's not a pattern. It's still inappropriate, it's still addressed. So I don't want you to think that that first one's a blue pass. That's not what's being communicated there. That's the pattern where we start to treat it a different way. Is that fair?
No, totally fair. And I was, I think just to piggyback on what Bill said, I think, whether you're looking at classroom management, structures like responsive classroom and how they have their morning meetings and how they model. As he talked about with the academic learning standards, I mean, we talk about healthy relationships starting in second grade and earlier than that. And so you're going to see kind of a variety of what I would say is intersections or access points of how we're working with students, even with the digital wellness piece. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it insightful? Is it necessary? Is it kind? I mean, that's the same thing when you talk about bullying and you think about how our words can harm or, physical aggression. So you probably have a lot too. Anything else you want to add? No, so I would say there are, we have a lot of resources and a lot of, I would say, frameworks and structures in place to support not only just, when you have that targeted bullying piece, but then how you treat people and how you think about what you say.
So then follow up on that, so we talk about what happens before the bullied and how we know that are bullied. So after a child is bullied, we've had several parents who've come to board meetings who have said, my child has been bullied and I don't feel like it's been addressed. Let's take it back to the building and make sure it's handled. What are the recourses for parents or families when they feel like their voices can be heard at that local level? The teacher has removed the student from classrooms and into the office, said this is what's happening, but then they're right back in the same setting and that repetition's happening. What are we doing to make sure that those kids feel like they've got justice?
Right. So I think that there's a lot there. What I would say is, the first piece is that to Brian's point, when it happens, like we can't undo what happened. We have to be able to then respond, right? And to respond efficiently. And I think in many ways, a lot of that is communication. So my suggestion would be in a situation like that is that parent and the school, they need to come together, and whether it is the building principal, it's the counselor, or whatever plan they have in place for their child, you want to feel that it's restorative, right? The event happened, so we can't, that's we can't change that. That's a fact. But the restorative piece and the support measures that we have in place for that child, that parent should be an active part of that. Now, obviously, you're limited in what you can share about other students and things of that nature. But as a parent, you want reassurance that we have a strategy in place to help their child, that we have a plan that's being monitored. And so my suggestion would be, the people that are closest to the work are the ones that can provide the information they need. So I feel like that communication that's ongoing and, two-way and reciprocal, it's like that parent engagement piece. That's the piece we need, right? When it sits too long and you're not sure what's happening and, you feel like, again, we're on this hamster wheel of the same thing happening over and over again. I really feel like that's when communication lines need to be opened up so that we have a clear understanding of what is happening.
Do you think most of our resources are put in elementary schools for the bullying aspect?
No, I think that it's part of it. I
Why,
think,
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
why I feel that way is because these kids are learning social skills then, and that's where they start out. It's the building blocks of their social getting along with kids. Kids are mean naturally. Nobody can deny that. You put two kids together, let them go, one will bully the other. I've seen it, but I think that's the building blocks in elementary kids, what's right and wrong, and teach them morals. So when they do get older, they take them values up in middle school and high school. Because I think by the time they get in the middle and high school, it's getting bar the door.
and I think that a lot of our folks spend time really with that conflict resolution piece. Littles don't have the words, so they find other ways to use them, and kids parrot what they hear, right? So that walks right into our school. So obviously the impetus to have those resources, not exclusively for bullying, but what I would say is you work on social emotional skill building, you're doing exactly that. You're thinking about the words you choose, how you use them, and then ultimately there's an accountability there, right? And so if you put it in the ethos and people are going to have a response to that, and it's either going to hurt them or harm them. And so I think that as we look at those different roles, I'm sure this all integrates, just like we talked about at the beginning of this. The academic indicators are integrated with how kids feel about coming to school, and if they are, I don't know. Do you want to speak any more to that? I feel like I'm taking.
I think that's why discipline is so important at that age. Because if they know they can get away with it, they're gonna keep doing it and doing it and doing it. It's just gonna progress and get worse and worse.
So it's really, like you said, it's two things and research supports this, that it's nurturing, but it's also setting very clear boundaries. And I think that's the piece where we talked about, it's so important that we know and we know early on so that we can address it. And then there's an accountability piece there. When you think about like that zero tolerance piece, absolutely, every child needs to walk through these doors feeling safe and without fear of any of these things happening to them. When it does happen, our response as an organization we need to meet those needs and support them, but then also set those clear expectations. And to Brian's point earlier, the teaching, right? And the instruction.
I know I'd be more harsh than most here, but I understand why you're not.
And I would just like to add that I would just, the nature of being in this position and hearing a lot of things that I am hearing that a lot of the things that were presented tonight are being done at the building level and things are improving. So I would just say thank you for working hard on this and putting this, as a major focus and having this presentation tonight. And very excited to think about where we might be in a few years from now if we continue to put a heavy focus on this. Just what kind of growth that we'll see in our students. And to Chris's point, I know the elementary schools are doing a lot and they're seeing a lot of improvement. And good job.
Thank you. And I get excited too, because if you play that forward and think about the 67% of our kids that are walking out of here with a great future ahead of them, think about the impact it can have on the rest of the world, right? I know that's a very hot, like balcony view, but I think ultimately that's our goal, is that when they leave us, that the world is a better place because they're good humans, right? And so thank you for your time and attention. Like we said, October is but a month, and this is something that we're focused on year long, but felt like we would be remiss if we didn't take an opportunity to at least highlight some of the efforts happening. Thank you.
On our agenda is facilities development.
Thank you, Mr. President. Under facilities development, we just have one item on the agenda, the easement right of way for the Stiles Resource Center. This is a resolution authorizing and granting the easement right of way to the Ohio Power Company along with electric and communications purposes for the Stiles Resource. This is the new building we're building there at Stiles off the Granner. After reviewing this item, I move it for passage.
We have a second
I'll second.
discussion. Roll call.
Bosso,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Martindale.
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes. Next under items for action, students, schools, and community. Ms. Martin.
Okay. I just have two items on the agenda for this evening. One is just simply a modification. In June, we had approved Finland Middle School 8th graders to travel to Washington DC. They are requesting just a slight modification in their dates to go a day earlier. So instead of May 22nd to 24th, they will go May 21st to the 24th. And the second item is the Central Crossing High School JROTC drill team has the opportunity to go to Parkersburg, West Virginia to compete in the drill meet. This will be done this November. Students will not miss school. After reviewing both of these items, I recommend the passage and move to do so at this time.
Thank you. We have a second. Any discussion? There none. Roll call, please.
Ms. Martindale,
Yes.
Mr. Bosso,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes. Next under items for action is going to be our personnel report. Mr. Shiner is away at district business, so I will give the personnel report tonight. On the board agenda this evening are 6 personnel items involving 241 persons. This includes 5 certificated resignations, 4 certificate changes of employment, 178 certificated employments, 8 classified resignations, 4 changes in employment status, and 42 classified employments. I'm going to review these in advance. I move them for passage this time. Give a second.
I'll say.
Ms. Martindale.
Ms. Martindale.
Yes.
Mr. Bosso,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes. Any items for board discussion? Hearing none at this time, it is recommended that the Board of Education adjourn into executive session according to policy 0166 to consider the appointment or the appointments or employments of public employees. Can we get a motion for that? I made the motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Yes. Okay, Ms. Martindale, all right, any discussion? Hear none, roll call please.
Ms. Martindale.
Yes.
Bosso.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes. We do not anticipate any further business after we, come back from executive session, but we welcome the state.